Welcome to Retailistic, the official podcast of Coresight Research for March 17th, 2026. This week, our CEO Deborah Weinswig welcomes Stacey Weismiller, President and CEO of the American Manufacturing Futures Institute, to talk about the road ahead for supply chain resilience. But before we kick it off with Deborah and Stacey, here's a quick highlight of some of the research publishing for our members this week. Learn about the newest breakthrough technology for retail in our summary report of the 10 hottest startups competing in the Shark Reef competition at the upcoming Shop Talk Spring Convention. We have a report detailing the impact of returns on retailer earnings and exploring new sizing standards to cut return rates. We have quarterly earnings roundup and 2 AI reports, the first on productivity gains and the second on the state of agentic AI in the U.S. and China. Visit Coresight.com to check out our full catalog. Now, here's Deborah and Stacey.
Stacey, thank you so much for joining us. So we just learned that you're from New Jersey. You're living where the new soccer stadium is being built. I was sharing to you my passion about soccer and playing in college, and you were telling me
that I'm obsessed with soccer.
I love it. I can't believe this. This is amazing. I actually volunteered at the 92 World Cup. I'm going to find it. I'll have to go off screen for a minute. I still have the jacket. Was it 92? Anyways, I still have the jacket.
94, I think.
I still have the jacket that I got. And it was like being around Europeans, right? I remember it was like there was a Germany-Argentina game maybe. And right, like I'm all 5 feet tall. And I had all of these people picking me up, which I was just like, what is going on? And I played the sport, but I'd never like been around the sport, if you will. And that completely like transformed how I thought about it. And so tell me, how did you develop this love of soccer?
Well, growing up, I actually grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania. And, it's on a Great Lake. It is cold and it snows a lot. Mm-hmm. And I was a kid that had a lot of energy. Probably too much, if you ask my parents. And so soccer made sense really early on in my life. And I will never forget, I actually one year wrote a song to Santa Claus about how I wanted a pair of Adidas Sambas.
No way.
Yes, I still have it. My mom kept this because I was so obsessed with getting a pair of Adidas Sambas because I was obsessed with soccer and I could not wait to play soccer. And of course, in Erie, in the winter, you're playing in a gym, basically.
No, but indoor, I will say, I think I loved indoor because like the ball never stopped rolling, right?
Oh,
so
yes.
To me, and I felt like I could have a bigger impact on the game. So I personally always really liked indoor. Outdoor is great, but then, I used to get like really like almost upset when I'd get rained on. Like it was just, I don't know what it was.
Yes.
I was like, I really didn't like it. And with the pandemic, all that kind of changed because I was like, the fact that I just get to go outside is great. But you'd be out there in games. It's like 35 degrees. You're literally like soaking wet. I remember I'd be standing there. I played a lot, but there were times you're on the sidelines and I'm just like, this is just like the worst thing.
Yeah. I have a lot of very distinct memories of this kind of weather, like this kind of, like that March, April, where as a kid, it was like the first day where it wasn't snowing or below 30 degrees. And you're like, time to play soccer. And I would get outside. I would have whatever I could find in the house, like half of my dad's Carhartt jacket, like long sleeves. And I would be kicking the ball against my house while also trying to avoid the snow pile that was still there. And then, a week later, you'd be like, oh, I don't feel good. Like, oh, I wonder why. Because I was outside for hours kicking that soccer ball around like piles of snow.
So my best friend lived behind me and 3 houses over. And she was our goalie. I was a left striker, left forward. And so we would train together. And we're both super disciplined. So we do I don't think we knew it was called fartlek training at the time, but we would run a lot. We would kick the ball around. My dad was our coach. So my dad was like a rocket scientist. He knew that me being out there playing a team sport was really important, but he didn't know the first thing about soccer. So this is very funny. So he got these 2 guys from the seminary because I think that way he was also very protective and they were amazing players. And so that's how, and so my dad would just kind of be there, making sure everybody showed up and if anybody was injured and this, that, and the other. And then he had he could not stand the sight of blood, was definitely, And so I remember actually there were two things. One, I remember one of the gals broke her nose and there was like a lot of blood. My father, I think we had to like have him sit down. And then the craziest was our like team captain. Her name was Jennifer, and her hip went out of its socket, and none of the like seminary guys were there. And so my father I think he like literally passed out afterwards. He had to pull it back into its socket. And so it was like I was like, who would have thought that this sport, and I think it's gotten also since we played much more, I think aggressive is the right word.
Yeah, it's more intense. Absolutely. It's more intense.
How old were you when you started?
I think 5 or 6.
Oh, well, I was 8, and that was still early. I actually, because it was so early for the sport, I played guys for a while.
Yeah.
And then my sophomore year, I think my high school put a team in place, and it was like all happy days after that. But yeah, it was interesting. All right, so like getting back, this is so much more fun. Well, I will say, Stacey, I was just in Hong Kong in December, and I spent time at the Advanced Manufacturing Center, which was truly mind-blowing. So they were taking finished garments that were at the end of their useful lives and taking the fabric back down to thread. Because in the past, right, it was cotton poly. That was a challenge.
Sure.
And I mean, it's like one of those things, I've known this industry, right? I've spent a lot of time in supply chain and manufacturing, and seeing that, you realize anything is possible. And they were growing hydroponic cotton. That was also like an out-of-body experience. And I will tell you what I learned from that is, well, they made sure I learned. They're like, please tell everybody to never make garments out of plastic bottles, because they showed me what happened when you took the fiber back down. It was unusable. And so they said, right, like all these other fibers, we can use them again and again and again. It's truly like recyclable, sustainable, ESG-ish. But they're like plastic bottles. They're like, a plastic bottle can become a plastic bottle, can become a plastic bottle. But a plastic bottle that becomes a shirt and then goes back is
so interesting.
Garbage. And I saw it, and like you could like, they were like very much, I mean, it was all about education. So I want to understand, your background is beyond amazing, but can you talk about your time at the U.S. Center for Advanced Manufacturing? Because, I mean, I don't even think I knew that we had that. And as somebody who spent a lot of my career in supply chain, I want to know everything.
Yeah. So first off, I think that your lead in there, right, around the conversation of education is extremely important in all of these podcasts, white papers, like whatever we're doing out in the open, like education as the first kind of main driver is really critical. So let's take it back a little bit, and I'll kind of like land the plane of how I got here. Right. I'm from Erie, Pennsylvania originally. As I said, my family has worked in manufacturing. My father was in manufacturing for 40 odd years. And when you grow up in a place like that, it is very much so the post-industrial city where everyone I went to high school with, their dad or someone in their family worked at the factory, right? It was just common knowledge that that's what your friend group was made up of. Their dad worked at the factory. I think I had one friend whose dad was a CPA, and we just thought that they were rich, and we were astonished. So that was very much so in my blood. And so I always say that this is what I know is a little bit of the nature versus nurture, right? I grew up around it. It's very much so part of who I am.
Can I double click? What does Erie, Pennsylvania look like now versus when you grew up?
So not too different, if I'm being honest, which is, I think, what's difficult. Because if you look at other cities like Pittsburgh, which I lived in Pittsburgh for 4.5 years. Yeah.
So as an analyst, we used to go, right? So like we had all the cities. I went to Pittsburgh twice a year for like 15 years. So, you get to know Pittsburgh. And I actually have a son at CMU, and we have clients in Pittsburgh. So I'm in Pittsburgh now, like once a quarter. And every time I'm there, first of all, it's a phenomenal city. It's got like great energy. It's like that urban, right? It's interesting, like urban energy. And because I think of the universities, right, because of the density of students between University of Pittsburgh and CMU, I mean, I remember hearing, gosh, this is like 2015. I remember hearing about like Uber, right? Like,
yes,
finding all this like amazing talent there. I'm like, and I remember I'm like in Pittsburgh, right? And that 2015, that's when, and we were actually at the time, we were writing all of these like startup ecosystem reports. And so we actually wrote one on Pittsburgh, and we did Pittsburgh, Nashville, Mobile, Alabama, because all these cities that, Indianapolis, right? Like these second and third tier cities,
right?
And right, when you start to kind of like peel that back, Cincinnati was one of them. You start to wonder what was it in the DNA in those cities versus others. And so going back to Erie, is there
Right.
still a lot of manufacturing there?
So not as much. And I
Okay.
think what I witness when I go there is that it was a factory town. So
Hmm.
it was the home and headquarters for GE Transportation, which is where my family
Oh,
started
interesting.
working. And as many factory towns, right, for every one job that is created through a manufacturing job, traditionally there's a multiplier of roughly three other jobs. So the city itself is definitely kind of scattered with small contract manufacturers and people who were feeding the supply chain of one of those large multinationals. As that multinational diversified,
Mm.
hit some hard times in the 2008 era, definitely a loss of jobs. But what that did was definitely hurt more of the tier one, tier two supply chain, right? So as we talk about supply chain, you'll hear a lot from me that I believe supply chains in cities are actually the same because they're systems and they have the same kind of characteristics, right? About resilience. We talk about cities, we talk about climate resilience. Well, supply chains are actually very similar in the fact that they also have to have a layer of resilience.
How, how do
So I
you
think
think about how do you think about smart cities?
I
Right, because that's a big topic, right? Like with Detroit and everything, and just what's like in the
sure.
background. I'm like, you're like bringing up all these things. I'm like, some I can't like, but it's if you think about this idea around right Detroit and
Mhm,
what it went through, and now that is kind of the poster child for smart cities. What do you think? There's something about these manufacturing cities that lends themselves to being smart cities? Because if you think about it, that can drive investment into those
sure.
cities.
Here's my general take on the words smart cities together. When I
I can't wait.
left Pitt when I left Pittsburgh, I actually joined the New York City Economic Development Corporation in 2016, and I was part of our team that was called Smart Cities. And I think
No way.
today yes, so I think today what I look at is I would use the words cognitive cities or emotionally intelligent cities because being book smart and then being street smart are very different, correct? I think we
Very.
can agree on that.
I
So why
my mother's mother she was the last of 10 children. She only completed the 8th grade, and she was the most street smart person you ever met and did incredible and she worked, right, like, back when women didn't work at all and was, like, a real pioneer, but it was her street smarts that got her there, not her education, and so I will say, from personal, I very much understand it.
yeah, and I think that is what for me as we take a look at manufacturing or the industrial corridors of our cities, I would lean into that street smarts conversation because
Uh,
we need to be thinking more about my analogy is manufacturing can be the donut hole, but the donut are all the things that make civic life really desirable. Having good schools, workforce housing, social services, good roads, walkability, access to food, access to education. So
mm.
I struggle sometimes when we talk about smart cities and B2G, business to government and having all these sensors. When in reality, for me, a smart city is one that works for our workforce and one that works for their families to create good lives and better lives. And a lot of times, that's actually where really good industrial policy
Yeah.
lends itself, and it's not always around just building a manufacturing site. It's actually about the other things, including
Well,
those social services that
isn't
create smart cities.
isn't it real I mean, it was amazing. So I spent a lot of time in Hangzhou,
Mhm.
and, right, like, you had this brain, right, in the city. And so, I mean, it'd be amazing, right? Like, I'd go to the office in the morning, and, like, one of the roads we took, there are 4 lanes in each direction, and then in the evening, there were 6 lanes in one direction and 2 in the other, and I'm like, "What
Right.
happened?" Right? Like, "What just happened?" So, like, living it and seeing how pretty much everything you said, right, this focus on education, on right, like, even kind of shopping, right? Like how to make things convenient for people and also fun and also uplifting everybody financially as well. To
Sure. Yeah,
me, like that to me has been the one tenet of a smart city that I haven't seen as much as I would like.
I agree with you. Right.
Well, I knew I liked you.
Yeah, and I believe that, if we just go back to basics of access and inclusivity, I really think we could actually solve a lot of our problems.
I do too. It was interesting. I was at this women in business event last night for YPO, and we had it was actually I didn't I was going because a friend of mine was like, I'm kind of the chair of this event. Can you come? I'm like, I didn't even read the details. So I show up, and there is the DA for Queens and 4 judges. And I don't think I closed my mouth the whole time because it was so fascinating to hear kind of like how they think about the city, how they think about services, because I will be honest, it's a point of view I've never heard before. And when you start to hear about the emotion with which our kind of government cares about in a really non-political way, I have to say I've been like on this inspirational, like kind of like I feel like this magic carpet ride ever since. And I don't want to like get off because I'm like, it's so wonderful to hear from these people. And actually one of them, like I totally identified with her on many levels. And I just went up and I introduced myself afterwards and everything. And we run a lot of events at Coresight, and she had like heard of some of what we've done. And she's like, our courthouse needs about $1 billion of investment. She's like, if you could host your events at our courthouse, she said, right, like we're going to ask for money for security and then maybe just something extra. She's like, we could start to improve the physicality. And I was like, done. And so building that bridge on allowing people to be vulnerable in the city about what they need and how we can help them, I'd never experienced it before, right? And yes, I'd experienced it like, oh, we need Wi-Fi, we need laptops, stuff like that. And, I'll do my best. But coming from the place that she did, it just started to change how I think about everything.
Yeah, and more of those conversations need to happen more often. I today run an organization called the American Manufacturing Futures Institute. It's a 501(c)(3). We focus on manufacturing and industrial policy through the lens of 3 Ps: people, policy, and place. And one of my board members spent 25 years in supply chain in the chemical industry, and she is a leadership coach today and works with a lot of leaders in the supply chain space. And her thesis is around emotional intelligence. She truly believes that if we focus on emotional intelligence, how we pipeline our leaders, how we discuss problems, how we actually go through the process of thinking through how to run businesses and work with people, we will get a lot more done. And so that is a big
I
part
can't
of
believe you just
our
said
work.
that. I just had a conversation with one of the leaders at Shop Talk with Raquan about he and I kind of co-host a startup pitch. And he was talking about how important like emotional loyalty is, which was like an idea I hadn't heard about. And I mean, I just talked to him like an hour ago, so I wrote it down. Like, you see me look away, I'm like taking notes. But it's like, you just wonder if people have changed in terms of how they ingest information and act on it.
I agree. And I think a big part of this is we're shifting from an ecosystem that is fully quantitative to something that has to be far more qualitative. I think we learned that during a point in time like COVID, where we talked about things like supply chains, which were no longer just around our triangle of cost, quality, time. We then had to build in these qualitative metrics, which was resilience. What does that mean? And for who? Right? It means something different for everyone. It's supply chains are like people, right? We are all fickle in nature and we all require different things. We're all unique. We're all snowflakes in many ways. And so I think that's where the emotional intelligence is coming in, because we have to think about things in a far different way. Like, it's truly not a KPI anymore.
I had been a Hong Kong employee. My family stayed in the US. For about 6 years, I commuted to Hong Kong, which sounds crazy, but at the time it didn't, right? Like when everybody else is doing it, like, and also too, right? Like I'm terrible. I'm not good with downtime. Like I am not a beach vacation person.
Story of my life.
Yeah, we're like meant to be. And December 29th of 2019, I pack up a bunch of stuff. I come back to the US, assuming I didn't know what exactly, but that I was going to be here for a while. And you start to kind of look at things in a different way, right? When you're starting to kind of connect all of those dots. And so I don't sleep that much. And I grew up in a very philanthropic household. So once the pandemic was like in full swing, I'm like, what unique skills do I have and how can I give back? And I was like, I can get stuff, right? Like I can get like level 2. A lot of my friends are doctors. I'm like, I can get level 2 gowns. I can get this, I can get that. But I also don't want to play God in any way, shape, or form. I'm like,
Sure.
I'm a pleaser. I don't want to like upset anyone. So I worked with this whole thing we created, which was like the empowered cities, right? So I'd be on the phone like weekly or more with the 7 mayors, hearing the challenges they're facing and trying to get stuff. And then, right, like leaning into different folks who had planes who could help us, and then working with like having stuff come into New York and how do we get it and starting to think about these ecosystems. And I will say I really learned for the first time about emotional intelligence there, because those who were at the greatest risk were those who were, let's just say, either the elderly or people who were disabled, right?
Absolutely.
Because
Right.
they could not, like, they relied on people in many cases to come into their homes, bring them things, and those people might not have PPE. And I was like, in a million years, I would not have connected those dots. It would not have been something I would have thought about. And so one of the areas that we really leaned into, because also when you look at the amount of Americans who, like, in the census, check the box as disabled, plus all those who don't, it's like 40% of the population. It is a
Right.
shocking number of people. And it can be like, you have a permanent limp. It can be, but you are by definition, right, less able-bodied. And I kept on trying to think of because I don't like the word dis in front of anything is not good. So I always try to find other ways to say it, although I'm not sure if everybody always liked that. But because everyone wants to check a box.
Of course. Yeah.
But I will tell you, you talk about things that I think are actually seem simple on paper, but I had to go through that to kind of really understand it. And sometimes I think you do a very good job of breaking down these very complex ecosystems and helping people understand the root of it, which is very hard to do.
Well, and it's easy to just associate a supply chain to, oh, it's the movement of goods. Let me get on Amazon or my local e-commerce dealer on my phone, my app, and have something delivered to my home. It's much more difficult and, quite frankly, stresses our brains to think about all the things that go on to get that one particular thing to your doorstep, right? We don't talk about that often. And I think COVID really pulled the curtain back on what a supply chain really is, right? I will say one of the things that really opened my eyes early was I did my graduate degree at the City College of New York in urban design. And one of my projects was really around food systems, right? And it was around, and I learned these things very quickly, which was that like
You don't want
98%.
to know.
No, 98% of our food supply in New York City comes on truck over one bridge. And you
Yeah.
start having that and you're like, oh my God. Like, so every time I
yeah.
buy fruit from my local West Side market, it's like on the same truck as all the other pieces of fruit that are going to all the other West Side markets. And if that truck doesn't get delivered to Hunts Point and there's not a buyer, I'm like,
Well, but you also start to think about, and I could spend like all day on this topic because I have a lot of thoughts on it, but you're also thinking about, right, like organic can't really touch inorganic because then it's not organic, but it's all touching each other.
layers
It's
and layers.
all like in that same truck, and like, the trucks are going over the potholes and oops, right, like this apple is going into so yeah, I think when you get to kind of what made you go to CUNY and study that? Because that is, like I said, this is a topic I'm actually fascinated by.
Oh, I have such an interesting story. So I did my undergraduate degree in architecture at Penn State. And I will tell you, again, I grew up in Erie. I grew up in this kind of hyper-focused, blue-collar, post-industrial town. And I wanted to see cities. I wanted to see things that were working with building. That just really blew my mind every time I would go to a city. I was that kid that like, we would go to a baseball game in Cleveland and I would like watch my parents like drive around the turn of the highway, like looking and being like, this is so cool. I just loved that. And I think a lot of it, again, was that.
Honestly, same. I've always
Yeah.
I get a certain energy from big cities, and I just feel like I don't know what it is, and I just feel much more alive. And for me personally, the city that's done that the most for me has been Shanghai. And I remember I'd come back to New York, and I live on the Upper East Side, and I'd look down like Fifth Avenue, and I'm like, there's no tall buildings, right? I mean,
Yeah, well, because yeah, coming from
and
Shanghai.
like this is like 8 million people, but this feels like so much like a small town. And it's all about like your perspective. And then you look at the number of cities now that have reached 25 million, and you start to think about their, right, like their ecosystems there. I think a lot about kind of, sanitation and hygiene and clean water. And we'll just call it, I mean, it is climate change ultimately, like some of the things that are changing some of these cities that they have literally no control over for the most part because of where we are. And that's like where my brain starts to hurt, because going back to, I'm a pleaser and I'm very philanthropic, and I'm like, you can't. And that's why I think it's so interesting what you do professionally, because you figured out a way, I think, to kind of bring it all together and to like make it.
I'm still trying to pull it all together, but things like this help to get that narrative out there, because when I went to City College, a big part of that was my 5th year in architecture school. I actually wrote my thesis. When you're in architecture school, you don't necessarily write a thesis. You do a project, right? So you pick a site, you go in, you pick a topic, and you really try to solve a problem. And I became obsessed with this conversation of work versus labor and craftsmanship as well. Mainly because this is kind of part of where I grew up, right? Which was people use their hands. And I was intrigued to understand, what does it mean to work a job where you're a laborer, and what does it mean to truly have a craft that you feel connected to? And again, goes back to how I grew up. I'm sure, if I had someone who was focused on me as a psychology major, I'm sure they'd do a full capstone project on who I am and my brain. But this was my thesis, was why are we not having a conversation about making and the thoughtfulness behind this? So it actually evolved into this project that was more focused on food for a few reasons. Number one, food is this beautiful way to learn. So I studied this book called The Craftsman by Richard Sennett. He was also an architect. And a big part of his... I read it probably 10 times. And a big part of his topic was, it takes 10,000 hours, the 10,000 hours rule to be an expert. And he talked
in Blink or whatever. Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes. And so he spoke a lot about actually Julia Child and how she could fillet a fish with her eyes closed. And so there was this interesting conversation between the art of making a chair, because my site was actually an old chair factory, to actually what it takes to build community and socialize those craft skills with others. And a big part of that was the art of food and the art of community. So for me, I just had this notion in my head of like, what is post-industrial America looking like today? And like, what are we actually doing to like bring out some of the, not necessarily nostalgia, but the beautiful things that built our country, right? Like if we could take an old factory that we used to make chairs at and we bring those same kind of ethos into like how we want to build apprenticeships into the culinary schools, or, like the understandings of how to make things and feel connected to things, that was actually what launched me to go to City College. I had a professor at Penn State who also went to City College, and she like at one time looked at me and was like, I think this is your path. And she was just, for the first few years, I was like, I'm not really sure I love architecture. Like, I don't love window mullions. Like, I liked the idea of the macro concept, and I loved economic development. I loved what cities and people in the movement did for commerce and for people. So, you get to the 4th and 5th year and you're asking yourself, what do I want to do? And she guided me and was like, I think you should do this. And I applied. I actually got waitlisted. And the day I graduated from college, I got in, and it was a magical thing that happened where I got to go to New York City, this place that I wanted to be my teacher. So really this city was my teacher, and I got to immerse myself in a place that I felt connected to. I also felt deeply disconnected from, because I didn't understand the white collar nature of a city. I was very much so like, where do people work? I don't understand this. And it was hard for me, but it was such an education that I lived in a shoebox. I would never go back. I would never ever change my, being so broke in the city, trying to make it. It was the best year of learning of my whole life.
It's funny you say that. I was just talking to somebody yesterday, I was in DC, and I was saying, right, how when I graduated business school, right, which I was very blessed, University of Chicago, to get a scholarship, and but it didn't cover, right, like housing and all that. And so it took me about 3 years to pay down because I don't like to be in debt. It's just my thing.
Get that, and
I understand. So I'm like, I can't believe I'm going to share this. But anyways, I had 2 suits. I had a blue skirt suit, and a black skirt suit. I had a pair of blue heels and a pair of black heels. And I had a few shirts and scarves. And for 3 years, mind you, I took great care of everything because that's all I had. And it's amazing when you kind of go through that. First of all, I wasn't like thinking about my time shopping, or I didn't have a lot of like things in my closet. I was like, oh, am I going to wear this or that? Right? It was like blue or black.
Yeah. You're like,
And
my closet's this big, so it holds 3 things.
but I'll tell you, you start to kind of like focus in a very different way,
Uh-huh.
and you start to think about your environment and your surroundings in a very different
You do.
way. And so I think that your kind of like how you got here, and like kind of I think that the architecture road into CUNY, that's a fascinating part of your story.
Yeah, and for a few years, I struggled immensely to tell this story because
Mm.
when I graduated, we were still in a recession, and my good blue collar parents were like, "Okay, time to come home." And I got a job at GE, which is how I launched my supply chain career to get into manufacturing. And I'll never forget, my dad was like, "Oh yeah, you have an interview," and it was for a contractor job, and I was like, "Oh, I can't wait to blow this job because I'm going back to New York."
Mhm.
And that was not the case, but it was truly it was both the most exciting and the hardest moments of my life to reckon with a lot of that. But then I also just told myself, I'm coming back. Like, this is my place. And I spent
I know.
5 years trying to figure out how to get back until I finally landed an interview at the NYC EDC. And I remember telling somebody there when I was interviewing, I was like, if you don't hire me for this job, I'm going to apply for every job you ever post until you hire me.
I love that. And so how did you end up? Because I saw that you were at the World Economic Forum. That's kind of one of those, you've made it. How did you end up there? Why did you want to be there? And on both sides, what do you think you learned, and what do they think they gained from you?
Yeah, so in all of 2022, the World Economic Forum had launched their Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. They have, I think, 20 of them globally, and the one that they were building in the US was the US Center for Advanced Manufacturing. So I had a friend that was there, formerly was at EDC with me. We reached out, had a few words I put in my resume because it was a lead for advanced manufacturing, and I'm thinking, okay, this is economic development at its finest, right? And it's focused on advanced manufacturing. They only have 10 pillars of what they focus on, and advanced manufacturing was one of them. So for me, it was like, of course, right? It's like having the World Health Organization for advanced manufacturing. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I need to try this out. And so they called me, I interviewed, and I, at the time, wasn't really looking for a job. I was pretty happy with what I was doing. And you don't say no. We'll just say that.
No.
You don't say no. When the World Economic Forum calls you, you don't say no. And so I was there. I was one of 2 employees in the US. The rest of our team was in Geneva. And my job was really to work on how to build better relationships across the US advanced manufacturing portfolio. Because as we know, a lot of the manufacturing ecosystem here is still very scattered. It's still, yeah.
And people don't know. I think that the role that you played, and probably continue to, is that I find also too, people even in the same city sometimes don't know how to find each other.
Oh, no, no, no. It's actually wild when we
Hmm.
think about how we run in a global network of people in advanced manufacturing, yet we have even people who work in the same industry, sometimes even the same company, who don't know that that other person is working alongside them. And I think that comes from decades of some of this disinvestment where a lot of times it's just put your head down and do what you're told to do versus building community. I'm a huge fan of building community, and I think that's where like the manufacturing ecosystem needs to double down on trying to build community both inside and outside of their organization. So I absolutely saw that, and the ones who do it and do it well are absolutely the ones who are already like ahead of the curve, like a Schneider Electric, that they're doing that really well. Some of the kind of mid-tier startups that I've been working with in I4O space, like ones that are doing it well, you can see them rise to the top, and the ones who are not are struggling.
Yeah, but they're not. I mean, it's interesting. So at NRF this year, right, the big National Retail Federation, big show in January, we hosted our own event on Saturday. We usually host something on Tuesday, but the event ended earlier, and I'm like, people are going home.
Right.
And so we did it Saturday, which was great because everyone I wanted to see, a lot of the topics I wanted to talk about, I got to do that Saturday. And so then when I showed up Sunday morning at like 8 a.m., I was present in a different way. And so we really
Mm.
leaned into spending time with our clients, like our existing clients. And then there were a few people I had promised I would pop by. But because of that, first of all, going back to, I was much more present. And what I saw, right, and I don't know if we hadn't done our event on Saturday, if I would have, is that a lot of our clients are starting to create these ecosystems, these platforms. So like Zebra, their whole booth was other companies. And they even to the point they put their logos. T-Mobile, the same thing. And then it was funny, we had a meeting with Intel, and they've been like a cornerstone of our AI council since day one, which thank you. But they're like, oh, we had this meeting. And so I'm like literally running, and I kid you not, right? I often wear running shoes at these things. I'm running trying to find them. And then I get to, and they're like, oh, no, they're up in this. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So they actually, we were meeting one of the companies that was leveraging their technology, which was so much more interesting. And when you start to think about how they were all elevating everyone else, I think that was different.
Yeah.
Because we talked to other tech companies who are already engaging us for NRF 27. And I said, right, like if you are like anything you're doing for anyone else, first of all, right, like you're, you may be able to kind of like extract some rent from others to like be in your booth. So that's the economic piece of it. But B, you're going to change how people think about you. And so I think this ecosystem idea, I feel like we're still in the earlier
We're
stage.
dating. We're in dating.
Yeah, we're dating. Yes.
We're dating.
But
I agree.
And so did the Advanced Manufacturing System Center come out of WEF, or how did that?
It was a partnership with the World Economic Forum and the state of Michigan. And again, the
cool.
World Economic Forum has, I think, 20 of those centers across the globe. So I think for the World Economic Forum to double down on a center in the US and specifically on advanced manufacturing says a lot about what they saw from an economic roadmap in the US. And rightfully so, right? Rightfully so. 2022 was a defining moment of thinking through coming out of COVID, coming into things like, CHIPS Act, the IRA, like investment there. And of course, then choosing a place like Detroit, which has been the backbone of manufacturing in the US for, centuries at this point.
We hosted, actually, it was fascinating, in 2017. We worked closely with Alibaba. It was like called this like gateway event. I got to spend time with the mayor. I was in Detroit for enough time to really start to understand, right, like the city, the opportunity. And I remember every tech company I talked to, I'm like, I'd go to Detroit and build, right? Like, and I don't know if what I've seen since, let's just put it this way, is that a lot of those companies I talked to about that, they've since gone to build in Pittsburgh, and they've seen huge success in Pittsburgh. And so that's been interesting, but I think it goes back to, I wonder if it goes back to, right, like the density of university students and corporate. I don't know if it's like the public to private, which, right, was very big in like kind of like how we think about things in China, right? Like the academic to, right, kind of,
that pipeline.
corporate. Yeah. And that. So I want to make sure, because we're like, I can't believe how much, like, I've loved this conversation, but I want to make sure that we talk about kind of like what you're doing today with the American Manufacturing Futures Institute, and how can those of us on this call, how can we support you?
Well, first, thank you. I appreciate, first off, conversations like this. I think a big part of the AMFI roadmap is to change the narrative for things like advanced manufacturing. One of my goals is to have a Super Bowl ad. Why are we not talking about manufacturing? Why are we not talking about manufacturing as a pipeline, a talent tool, but also an economic development tool, right?
Right, so for 2027, we got to. I like it, but this is like what we've got to do, right?
Yeah, for me, I think we have 4 core goals, right? First goal is to really change the narrative. And many people are trying. I think it comes back to that herd mentality that we have to build a really good ecosystem. And I want us to really be leading the charge, because it's not just about workforce and upskilling. It's like a whole package, right? It's a whole package of talking about people, policy, and place. We need a narrative around all of that. We need a narrative that this is not a conversation about tariffs. This is a conversation about who we are and what we want for our future. Manufacturing can play a role there. We don't need to have a conversation only about making sure our kids go and work in financial services. We can also figure out how manufacturing plays a role in our civic society. That leads kind of into our second goal, which is we want to be long haul stewards. So what does that mean? I'm not interested in the flag waving of like what's cool today, what's not cool tomorrow. It's like, what is a long-term strategy here that we can be thinking about, that we are stewards to our people, our cities, these institutions? Because if we do this where every 4 years we have a different stance, it's not going to work. So I want us to be civic-minded and long-haul stewards to understanding what this means. And really, the third part is the emotional intelligence part. So how are we truly engaging our leaders, our future leaders, and bringing emotional intelligence into the game? My personal perspective is there's plenty of people out there in the world who are building technology, who understand how to implement technology. We need to be the organization who understands how we do that with people first and
Mm,
emotional intelligence at the forefront of that conversation. I am never going to tell you I'm building the best AI tool, but what I'd like to make sure I tell you is that I am very clear on how people play a role in that kind of technology advancement. It's
mm.
huge, right? I mean, someone has
Not
to
many
do it.
people, I was about to say, not many people are talking about that. And what I find even almost more concerning is that, right, companies will talk about ROI and cost savings. And when they're not mentioning people, of course, it's oftentimes through headcount reduction.
Right.
And so I'm like, if that's what's happening, right, like kind of it's good to understand what roles
Sure.
and then, right, like, and how do we it was interesting, I spent a lot of time down in Bentonville, Arkansas, and
Mm,
Fayetteville and all that, and so I did something in Rogers, Arkansas, with kind of, like, the local government around, let's call it, like, upskilling. So, like, as some people had, found themselves unemployed, what was it that they could do so that they could be relevant in the workforce again? And I think that having that conversation and also I understand, right, at the end of the day, right, these are publicly traded companies and they have to put their shareholders first. But I do think that their shareholders would appreciate if there was, if you have made a decision to kind of part ways with somebody and you don't think they're going to be useful in the future, maybe you can kind of at least help them upskill to something else. Or you can, like, repurpose them and train, right, like, and have your own
absolutely.
or even going back to, like, I think your idea of an ecosystem I love. What if, like, some of these companies pool resources and they can all kind of, like, work together to upskill the workforce? So I think you bring up a topic that's not often discussed because it's difficult.
It's difficult, and we don't always have the appropriate numbers to put up behind that, right? It's much easier to say, my cash on hand at the end of the quarter is X, our efficiency improvements were this percentage. It's a very difficult conversation to say, I was actually able to place a person in a job that they care about, because that is that qualitative conversation that I was having earlier. Now, a big part of what I would like AMFI to play a role in is how do we
Mhm.
redefine those KPIs? Because yes, we do have publicly traded companies, but at the same time, I have a 401k. I'm an investor in many of those companies, and I would love to see those kinds of returns come back.
That's a very cool problem to solve because I think that when I was an analyst at Citi, we would publish this report every year in January in coordination around, like, CES. So I was leading the global consumer team. I worked very closely with the global tech team and I covered some of the tech companies. And we would rank all of the retailers, right, on, like, kind of five different, if you will, areas. And so it was amazing, like, when you rank something, like, people would be on earnings calls, and they were, like, talking about, "Oh, like, that Citi report, right? So as a result, we're doing this." But it would be fascinating if there so I think that this ties in as another topic right now, and we've definitely got to double click on this, which is how do you measure the ROI from AI? Because, right, there's a huge amount of spending, and a lot of companies are
And
having
job
trouble.
creation, which is a
And then
different conversation we need to have because it's going to change. Those metrics are going to change.
And I think that if you can right, so now we have ROI, job creation, or what are we doing in terms of upskilling, whatever we wanna call it. I'm sure there's a better way to put that, but kind of taking our employees who've been, like, displaced and, like, repotting them. Because to me, the human side of all of us should want to give a higher valuation to a
Absolutely.
company that does that. I like that. I'm gonna be, like, thinking
I'm
thank
going
you,
to
I'm
be
gonna be
pushing
thinking
on that as
I'm
long
not
as
gonna be
I'm
able to go to
here.
sleep tonight. I'm gonna be thinking about this. I'm like,
Great. Well, send me a
but
text. We can chat.
I will. So as you need kind of, like, help from our community, do you need donations? Do you need time? Do you need
Yeah.
awareness?
Great question. So in 2026, we are just looking to raise a modest $300,000 to really just get ourselves off the ground. I have an amazing board so far. I have 4 board members who I trust, who are an amazing group of people who've supported me. The other thing I can say to this community is my board member, Paul LeBeau, former chief manufacturing officer for the state of Connecticut, currently head of applied technology at the University of New Haven. We've just kicked off a newsletter. We're going to be launching a podcast. We can absolutely have you on. You can be our first guest.
I'm there. I'm there.
Amazing. Good. So subscribe to that. I'm happy to send the link to everybody.
Please. We'll put it in the link for this too.
Great. So I would say we're really looking to get off the ground and be able to build capacity so that we can create those partnerships that we really want. I believe that we are a vehicle. There are a lot of organizations doing this across the world. I am not looking to duplicate anything. I'm looking to be a vehicle for change. So if you already have an organization that is pushing something in those areas of focus, as I mentioned, let me know because I want to be a vehicle. And I do believe we are better together. I've tried to make a commitment that doing projects alone is not going to be in our, a day-to-day. I believe that we as an organization need to be partnering on everything. So I do believe that, there's a lot of opportunity for people to, what I would say, just, get on the train because we're at the station. And there's seats for everybody.
Stacey, I will tell you, I run Coresight the exact same way. And it is like fundamental to our company because, it's very interesting. I would say we are in the minority just from what I've experienced.
Of course.
Because, right, we'll have companies who look at us as a competitor. I'm like, oh, we don't want to compete. We want to augment, to enhance, right? Let's
competing is exhausting. We did that as kids playing soccer. We don't need to do that any longer in our adult life.
Also, I'm all about I take the I'm gonna assume that you're also an extreme extrovert like myself.
Yes.
I get major energy from being with other people in friendly fire, right? Not oh, don't cross this line kind of thing. And so I really do believe that you and I see the same future. And because I've spent so much time in supply chain and understand some of the, I think ultimately, and this is where I think you do have a big job ahead of you, is I think that the awareness piece is a challenge. And
Absolutely.
I don't want to downplay. So everyone, you should donate a lot because I think Stacey has a huge opportunity to really do a lot of good.
Well, and ask hard questions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I did a podcast with Tulip Ventures, Natan, the CEO, and he ended and he said, Stacey, just keep asking the hard questions that other people don't want to ask. And I think that is a key element here is we do not need to have cute conferences where we're sitting at the table talking about ideas. Let's ask hard questions and do things that are super relevant today. They're important, right?
Because it's relevant to this conversation and relevant in so many ways. I urge you to look at my LinkedIn post.
Yes.
With Sarah Clark from American Eagle, because
I did see
first of all, she's their chief supply chain officer and she's amazing. But in there, I'm like, what is it that makes you smile? And I'm like, I smile when I see her because I know she's going to ask this impossible question that I don't know how to answer, but she's going to make me better. And I will say, I think the two of you would be fast friends and care about a lot of the same things. And when you can surround yourself with those kind of people, I think we can be I've always believed that we could be superhuman and in our existing bodies, but it's a matter of finding people who are not necessarily like-minded, but abled.
Yes.
Because we're all going to have different ways that we see things. But if we're interested in solving hard problems, which is what I my brother and I both give me the most difficult thing to do. And I love it because for some reason I get energy from that. And I feel like you do too.
Absolutely.
Or you wouldn't be doing what you're doing.
Oh, no. I would not be on this journey by any stretch of the imagination. So.
Well, I can't wait to see more of you and have you at our events because I do think you need to talk about this and you need to put people on the spot, right? I think you've got to also, I'm giving you full permission at our events to ask the hard questions.
Great.
Because I think when people become uncomfortable, they start to think differently. And that's, I think unfortunately, I think that, because I think like me, you're a pleaser, I think that that's the role you need to play. And it's not an easy journey, but I'll tell you myself, and I'm sure Sarah will be, and there'll be many others in our ecosystem that'll be right behind you to help you. And whatever you need, please ask it of the Coresight community. Please ask me personally because I'm here to support you.
I appreciate it so much. And honestly, just thanks for having me. It's always great to meet new people who care about the same things in this world.
I love this. Every
So-
minute of it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah, and thank you for joining us this week. Coresight Research serves our members with leadership communities, strategy consulting, technology assessment, data resources, seminars, conferences, proprietary research, and more. Visit us at Coresight.com to learn about all the ways we can support your success. Have a wonderful week.